My journey to Agile Finance started the day our CFO threw our budget in the trash can. It was a very typical weekday morning in January of 2004. I was in a very nondescript office building in our CFO's fourth floor corner office. He'd just come back from our board meeting where our 2004 budget had been presented for approval. This particular budget was the culmination of an absolutely brutal budget process. Coming out of the dot-com recession, there was a keen interest for us to start reinvesting in our growth. And that, of course, led to budget submissions that were completely unrealistic and resulted in budget meetings that were not only extraordinarily frustrating, but absolutely unproductive. And after the first few got so bad, the CFO said to me, I'm not going to any more of these. Force the budget back into the tops-down targets and get it ready for the board. I'm sure you've never heard that before. So that particular morning, our conversation went something like this. Hey, boss, how'd it go at the board meeting? Fine. He's sitting there bending a paperclip to within an inch of its existence, right? So did our budget get approved? He's like, yep. So he was brilliant, but kind of monosyllabic that way, so this was not an unusual conversation for us. So I'm about to turn and walk out of his office, but he's not done. He picks up this budget book, this 3-inch tome full of very detailed budget schedules. He goes, Nevine, this thing is worthless. It tells me nothing about the risks and opportunities we're facing. We all know all the numbers in here are completely made up. I can't manage the business with this. And he takes this thing and throws it in the trash can. And so I'm standing there confused and not totally sure what to say. And he turns to me and says, find a better way. And that started us on a path to not only eliminate budgets and replace them with a true rolling forecast, but also basically optimize to where we got to a very different management system, one that was effective and agile and very successful. And we were exceptionally successful. In the 10 years that we operated this publicly held company without budgets, we delivered 40 consecutive quarters of top-line revenue growth. And that includes during the years of the Great Recession. So let me give you a little bit of background. The company I'm talking about is TW Telecom. It was a fiber optic-based business services telecom provider operating in about 75 markets across the US. We were publicly held and everything that comes with that. And we grew to about $1.6 billion in revenue with mid-30% EBITDA margins and about 3,500 employees by the time the company was acquired. We were in a fast-paced, high-growth mode in a technological space that was accelerating at unprecedented rates. Technology in telecom at the time was outpacing itself in no way that we'd ever seen before. So our business problem to solve was how to be responsive in this kind of a marketplace. And we knew that rapid decision-making and having a differentiated customer experience were going to be critical for our success, if not our survival in this market we were in. We were a $1.6 billion company, but that still dwarfed us when you think about who's a competitor in the telecom space in North America. So with that, there we go. This is my throwaway slide because I am the only finance person in this room that I know of, except for maybe Heidi, who might have a few years on me in that space. But when I talk to finance people, I have to explain to them why this is such an imperative today. It was clearly important for us 20 years ago because of the sector and the competitive environment that we were in. But obviously, in today's world, and with all the great presentations we've seen here this morning, this idea of the advancement and acceleration of technical innovation and the need to be able to engage with that next-gen workforce, who, by the way, are not going to be putting up with old ways of working. Well, guess what? Agile is 20 years old, give or take, and you guys are thinking about reinventing it, reimagining it. Well, finance got a few years on you. Budgets were invented in 1921. They actually copy-pasted that idea from the Federal Budget and Accounting Act of 1921 and brought that into industry. And at the time, that was great. Industry wasn't moving at the pace that we're just moving at today. And then, of course, finance doubled down in the mid-70s with the Federal Accounting Standards Board, also known as FASB. And then we tripled down, if that's a thing, in 2006 or 2002 with Sarbanes-Oxley and the SOX Act and the peekaboo that came after that. So finance has a long tradition of being settled in their ways. And that's part of where the agility and finance rub heads all the time. Getting back to my story, though, which is where I really want to go. So I'm back in my office, and I'm trying to figure out what to do with this find a better way thing, right? And what do you do when you don't know the answers to something? Because I'm pretty sure my boss in that instance had no idea what he wanted. He just knew we couldn't continue on the way we always had been. And so I'm sitting there and I'm thinking about it, so what do I actually do with this? And what do you do when you don't know the answer to something? You Google it, right? Well, okay, I know we've been talking about AI all day, but this was 2004. There was no AI. I was Googling, right? And I was proud to be Googling at that time. So I type in, what do you do when you don't do budgets? And Google spits back at me a reference to this book called Beyond Budgeting by Jeremy Hope and Robin Fraser that had just been published the fall prior. And I read this book fascinated by these very innovative management constructs that these gentlemen had researched. But I also had this visceral reaction to the idea of not doing budgets. I mean, I was good at doing budgets. I have a background in engineering. I'm a total math geek. Budgets were my jam. The more detailed, the better. And I'm really, really good at planning, and I can prove that to you. So in my world, where we did budgets pretty much most of the year, or if we're not doing budgets, we were re-budgeting something or other, I had about 2 weeks of downtime, which was right after taxes were done on April 15th and before we would go into our rebudgeting cycle in May. I have 2 awesome daughters. They're born on April 16th and April 17th. So the only 2 downtime weeks I had a year is when I had my children. So yes, I know something about planning. I'm really good at it. So I'm reading this book and I'm realizing that some of these ideas these guys had documented, some of these principles are really awesome and they would work for us. Like this idea of getting behind a more updated version of planning. I could get there, right? But there are some other things that really weren't going to fit for us. There were some things that were counter to our culture and our industry. For example, Beyond Budgeting would advocate that salespeople aren't commissioned. Well, that doesn't play in telecom in North America, where sales organizations are coin-operated. Even though as a finance person, I thought no commission sounded like a great idea. I don't know. But so I read this book, and I distilled this down into a white paper that I gave to my boss. And we iterated on this for a bit. And then he took it to the executive team, and they're like, yeah, this is probably what we need to be doing. The story actually goes that he kind of said, this is what we're doing, didn't really ask them for any input. But that's the guy he was. So with that green light to go ahead, my team leaned into the tactical. We're finance people. What do? We draw process flows. We prototype forecasting models in Excel. Yes, it's a great prototyping tool. At least it was at the time. And we started developing training slides to be able to roll out this great new process into the organization. And as we were doing this, we came to the realization that this was going to be a huge cultural change for us. And change was something we were not good at as an organization. We sucked at it. So much so that I'd been on a task force where we had been asked to evaluate what happened with our last major disaster system deployment, because we really were terrible at those. And we had recommended that one of the things we needed to do was bring a change management expert on staff so that we could start building this capability, this core skill set of change management into our cultural DNA. So with me having to bring about 150 leaders along on this crazy journey I was about to embark on, I enlisted the help of our brand new director of change management. And he taught me about burning platform pitches, which I had never heard of before. And my friends in the oil and gas industry find this slide highly offensive because you don't show that and talk about burning platforms, but hey, here we go. It was actually invented by I believe it was the CEO of Ericsson, and when he was talking about cell phone innovation. But the idea being that this was an imperative for us, a do or die imperative to be able to not only cut our process interval times fast down to where we could respond to the industry we were in, but also really create a differentiated customer experience. It was really about being agile, even though we were not calling it that at the time. We were solving a business problem. So amazingly, my finance team started doing some very non-financy things that you're all familiar with, because I don't have to explain to this audience what change management is. When I talk to finance people, I do. But we started amping up our communication skills. We learned about change readiness assessments and testing messaging to make sure that what you were saying was actually coming through on the other end appropriately. And we learned about enrolling stakeholders in your initiative as opposed to dictating at them, which is what finance normally does. It's like, this thing is due then, just get it done. And so as we were doing this, we also realized that this really couldn't be just a finance thing, even though I was kind of in charge of this little initiative. I was very fortunate that in our C-suite, I had sufficient support to actually change the conversation around this from it being a finance thing to it being a corporate initiative. And while I didn't have everybody in the C-suite, I had what I'm going to call critical mass. I had enough of the important players on my side that they came alongside me and communicated that this was going to be a fundamental change in how we manage and evaluate our business. And that's what really set us on this path of enabling incredible change management in our organization, which was something that we had never really done well before. But so with this new director at my side and us leaning into figuring out how to engage with the organization, we really moved in a very different and intentional way than we had ever done before. A good thing too, because as we were meeting with our regional offices and starting to figure out what we had to change, there were kind of two key things that happened. The first thing is they started to ask us questions. Funny how that works. And we realized that without a budget, so many of our processes were no longer valid. They were essentially broken. So many things, not just financial processes, but other operational processes rely on that budget that we no longer had. It was like by pulling it out of our corporate fabric, we were unraveling a sweater. And so one of the things that we were working towards was how do we change the conversation in the organization? Because guess what? Most organizations are on an autopilot decision model, and it's all focused on that budget thing, right? What is the question that people ask when they have to make a decision about an investment or a hire or initiative? Is it in the budget? If it's in the budget, you have to do it. Like if you had the foresight to figure out to stick it in your budget last August and it's there, you're going to do it, even if it's no longer relevant or important. On the other hand, if it's not in the budget, you can very defiantly avoid all conversation around it because you don't have to do it because it's not in the budget. It takes away any kind of in-the-moment, real-time, real-factor decision-making that organizations have. So we took the budget away, so now what do? We had to come up with a different way to help people put guardrails around the decisions they were making. And what we came up with this very simple mantra: do better than you did last quarter. Whatever decision you make, you have to do better than you did last quarter. We didn't tell them $1,000 better or 1% better. We just said do better. The idea being that if every market, every business unit, every division, every function did just a little bit better, we would grow. That's the guardrail we put in place. And we said, you know what? We also need to make our processes run faster, so guess what? Let's push them closer to the front line. And so with that, leaders who for years had been screaming about how they wanted to be more empowered, well, hey, guess what, guys? You're empowered. And their face fell because they realized this: empowerment comes with huge accountability. And they were suddenly very, very uncomfortable with that. And for two reasons. One, they were very distrustful that we in finance were going to stick with this new approach, right? That we were really going to do things differently. And the other one is they were extremely uncomfortable with making those decisions outside of this autopilot model. So we started to have some very explicit conversations about what it means to be empowered. Just because you have the autonomy and the authority to make a decision doesn't mean you have to do it in a vacuum, right? There's a whole peer group that you can go talk to, people at your level who've probably made a decision like this before, and you can brainstorm some risks and outcomes and things like that. You have a team that likely has to implement the outcome of whatever decision you make. They might have some really keen insights from their day-to-day work that you might want to get some input from. And hey, you still have a boss that you can go chat with, you know, coaching, counseling, all that good stuff that bosses are supposed to be doing. And I'm from finance. I'm here to help. No, for reals this time? So we embedded my finance team in the field. We literally moved them close to the front line so they could work side by side with our operations and sales leadership. By doing that, they became trusted advocates for them because they were able to see in a real-time way the decisions these guys were facing and what the challenges were they were trying to solve. Not only that, but because of who they were advocates for them back at corporate, helping us to figure out how we were going to remove obstacles out of the business. And over time, they became very trusted advocates and sought out and valued business partners for the field organizations. I know it's hard to believe, but there really is a lot of common ground with finance. It's just we're not speaking the same language, and that's the biggest problem. Because at the end of the day, we want the same things, right? We want visibility through accurate data. We want to be able to have the timely completion of and reporting on initiatives and investments. And we all want the business to grow and be successful. So there is a lot of common ground. It's just a matter of having that conversation. So I challenge you to go find your favorite finance person in your organization and set up a coffee date with them and start having that conversation and breaking down those walls. So as we were optimizing our processes, we started to figure out that no matter how much tinkering we did and no matter how much optimization we were creating, we were never going to be done. Every time we had a process we thought we had figured out, the business would start to shift because guess what? Customer demands shifted and the marketplace shifted. And so we got ourselves into this mode of true continuous improvement because we inevitably had to keep moving to where the business moved next. So no matter how much we fixed processes, we pretty much never got done touching them. It was an ongoing opportunity for learning and growth in our organization, way more than we had ever imagined at the beginning. So as we were doing this, we realized that our first time through this budget process was going to be this really cool, big, exciting event, like in October of 2004. We were ready to go. We had our cool Excel models. We had the teams trained. Everybody was ready. And it failed miserably. Well, because we're human, right? The model had glitches. The instructions weren't totally clear. And gee, all the people that had previously done budgets hadn't quite let go of their budget mindset because guess what? We in finance had been beating that into them for years. But we learned from our mistake, we adjusted, and we did it again. And we did it again, and we did it again. And we learned that in our culture of revolution, which our culture was one of, once we set up our mind on doing something, we would just take that next step, ready or not, here we come. Because we figured out that by doing, instead of just sitting there and thinking about it, you learn so much more and so much faster. And that we had to go at 80% because otherwise we would never go at all. And so that became a key dynamic in our organization. And that momentum translated well beyond my team into other areas of the organization. We started getting these sparks of change all over the place that turned into the spiral of goodness. Our operations team was working on really a best-in-class customer experience solution that was unprecedented. And our IT department had just started agile ways of software deployment, and they were delighted with our new, much more frequent planning process, and they were jubilant when we moved from funding projects to funding teams. Now, not everybody was feeling this the same way. Some people self-selected out because they just didn't like this rapid cadence, this not having a budget, this actual decision-making where you have to truly manage, not just listen to what the budget had said. But as we did this, the people who stayed, the people that self-selected out, for those who stayed stayed with us on this journey, they really got to live in a culture that was much more nimble, much more agile, if you will, and experience what it was like to really be part of a common cause and a larger purpose. And my favorite part was that my team, the finance team, was no longer seen as an ivory tower obstacle and called fun names like revenue prevention. They really did call us that. It was pretty awful. So my journey, I hope, leaves you a little bit curious and inspired. I love what Heidi said about transformation because for us, this wasn't an event. It just became part of who we were. And these kinds of things, if you're really, truly leading into transformative events, they become really overwhelming really, really fast. And so one of the techniques, one of the tactics that we used to keep our teams smiling and engaged is we injected some fun and levity into the middle of all of this heavy-duty stuff we were doing. So I want to share one of those stories with you because this always makes me smile. As we were rolling out this process, we were talking about and learning things. To Shannon's point, we were trying to unlearn the word budget from our corporate vocabulary. And if you think that's an easy thing to do, it's not. So the B word, as we started calling it in our training session, became the object of these funny stickers that we had placed on the conference room tables. The idea was that if you heard anybody say the word budget, you got to take one of these stickers and stick it on their shirt. Basically brand them for their little mishap there. As you can imagine, within fairly short orders, people were diving across tables to put stickers on their colleagues who had said the B word because we were trying to get this out of our vocabulary. So, and everybody was really engaged in this activity and walked out of that room in the afternoon covered in stickers, us presenting included, because even we hadn't totally shed that that word out of our vocabulary, even though we had already mentally well moved on to doing rolling forecasts. People proudly wore those stickers all the way through dinner that night. And it really helped us understand that how much they engaged in the conversation in the room because of this one little simple thing that helped them pay attention to what was being said. It also helped them get out of their chairs once in a while in a very long meeting. And they really retained the information quite well from what we had discussed that day, because we did some like really fun little things like that to engage differently. And to me, that's what transformation is about. It's really about engaging differently. But what we did 20 years ago was truly on the bleeding edge of differentiating management models, of an agile management model, even though, again, at the time, we certainly weren't calling it that. We created something truly remarkable. We became the most responsive company in our industry in terms of customer experience, innovation, and planning. Our CFO was interviewed for Business Finance magazine in May of 2010. Now, this was a different CFO than the one who had started this whole journey, but this gentleman nonetheless understood the value of what we were doing in terms of our very innovative planning models, and the fact that as a public company CFO, the predictability of our forecasts were absolutely amazing. So in this particular interview, it was the article ended up being entitled "Where Only the Agile Survive." Now, I had no influence on that. That's what they chose to call it, and it was about the most apropos thing that I could have possibly come up with. It was incredible in terms of how they characterized what we did. This is the first time our initiative had ever been attached to the word agile. But I knew he was totally with me on this journey when he said we talk about results, not budgets. And that was or not budget variances, and that was so extremely true for our organization. We had taken such a massive leap in those 6 years in terms of where we were from a very traditional tops-down command and control, about as archaic as you can be management style, to this incredibly agile way of doing business. So, as a finance leader, again, usually have to spend a lot of time convincing people about things like change management, the value of process optimization, and how hard transformation really is, but that there are ways you can get it done. I know I don't have to convince you of that, but I am 100% convinced that in this world where technology is just accelerating at such an unprecedented pace, and we're dealing with complexity of a workforce that's no longer going to put up with old ways of working in this world, bottom line, I'm convinced that only agile companies will survive.
So one of the problems in IT often is you need more structure for some particular reason. Did you find that you were pushing up against legitimate legal structures that made this hard to be adopted or accepted, like stuff that's actually built into the law or audit requirements, et cetera?
And so we were in a telecom space, a publicly held company, so there was lots of regulation and requirements. But at the end of the day, a lot of those, you create constructs around them that are way more complex than they needed to be. I mean, we generally found that our processes were too convoluted and we could really get away with simpler, or we really didn't need them at all. We had just talked ourselves, it was head trash. We had talked ourselves into believing we needed them. And so it's the same thing with budgets. There are very, very, very few organizations in the world that actually have to have a budget. The vast majority of them, it's just something you tell yourself you have to have. It's that, well, everybody that came up through MBA school, like you learned you had to have a budget. You really don't. But so yeah, we were never non-compliant. We never failed an audit. We never got in trouble with the FCC. So we did all the right things, but you can still do that in a way that you don't impede the organization from being able to be responsive in the marketplace.
Hi, Nevine. So I'm a former Foreign Service Management Officer, and I just want to tell you that this is by far one of the best presentations I have seen in years.
Thank you.
I remember sitting in an Agile government leaders meeting, and they were talking about where Agile is going, and I said, until we get Agile budgeting right, nothing else matters. And so I really want to thank you for this. I guess my question to you is like, when is the book coming out? Because I think when we talk about this and when we understand what it means, resourcing in finance is the abstraction of human energy, right? It's an abstraction. It's how we think about it. It's how we apply it. And we've talked about these things for many, many years now, as you pointed out. But the one thing that continues to be missing in this discussion is, how do we think about these in terms of what the business schools are teaching? How do we think about this in terms of how do we actually apply these concepts to modeling and funding and actually implementing these things? You know, if you follow some of the bigger programs in the Agile community, they'll talk about value management, they'll talk about portfolio planning, that sort of stuff, which is very IT oriented. And as you bring it back into the main line of business, which is, to your point, how do we service the customers? How do we provide agility to our business to support that growth? My question to you is, like, how do you start normalizing that conversation in the places that matter with your business colleagues who are actually doing that work?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, from my perspective, I was fortunate. I had leadership that was willing to go there. They were a very forward-thinking leadership team that were never really interested in being part of the norm. Because of who we were, we had to differentiate in our environment. Otherwise, we weren't going to survive. Our competition was too huge. I mean, like, the bigger competitors, they were billing in a day what we were billing in a year. So, you know, the scale was just ridiculous. So we had to figure out a niche way to play. And I think that's probably the angle, is to figure out what do you have to solve? What business problem do you have to solve? And then everybody has to be at the table. I mean, I think, to me, one of the critical things that's missing from most Agile teams is finance representation. They're not included in the conversation. They don't have a seat at the table. How can you expect to change processes that are stuck in these molds from 100 years ago if that organization is generally excluded, or often self-excludes, right? They're either not invited or they choose not to participate. In our world, when we started developing product, and we built some very cool, innovative products back in the around 2013, 2014, part of the reason why the company was acquired. We were the first telecom company that had true dynamic capacity, where like an IT manager could go get on their cell phone at like 10 o'clock on a Friday night when the marketing guy called them and said, hey, we're running a promotion over the weekend. They were literally able to dial up their bandwidth remotely. It was super cool what some of this innovation begat. But we had everybody represented, not just IT, not just marketing. Finance was on our product teams. And my team loved it because, A, they got to learn about the business, and they were part of the conversation. So we were able to do things like stop funding projects and start funding teams, because we literally sat down and said, okay, what do we need? What do you need? How do we make this work together? And it wasn't that hard, because at the end of the day, like I said, that idea of having valuable, visible data across the span of the organization, it worked. So it's about communication, it's about conversation, it's about true collaboration. And I don't care what anybody says. Everybody in the world knows how to collaborate. They're just not willing to do it. And so I think that's really what it comes down to.